The moment Jordan walked into the classroom, he felt the eyes on him, but he didn't expect what would happen next. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a clipped tone, was standing at the front of the class. She looked over at him as he made his way to his seat in the back, his hand gripping the straps of his worn backpack. The moment her eyes landed on his clothes, her expression shifted. "Jordan," she began, her voice cutting through the low hum of the room. "Is that really what you're wearing to school today?" The silence in the classroom thickened, every student's attention turning toward Jordan. He had worn this shirt before, a faded red one that didn't quite fit him anymore, paired with his best jeans, both of which had seen better days. But to him, they were his best, his only. The teacher's lips pressed into a thin line as she continued, her voice louder now, each word dripping with judgment. "This isn't a charity event, Jordan. If you want to succeed, you need to start acting like it. Don't you care about your future?" Jordan's face flushed. His chest tightened, and he lowered his head, clutching his backpack straps even harder. He could feel the sting of her words like daggers, each one digging deeper. His classmates shifted in their seats, some shifting their gazes away, others snickering under their breath. But Jordan didn't respond. He never did. He had been through enough over the years to know that speaking up didn't change the way people saw him. His clothes didn't define him. But in that moment, it felt like they did. The teacher, seemingly satisfied with her reprimand, turned back to the board, leaving Jordan to shrink in his seat. His heart pounded in his chest, the shame settling deeper with each passing second. The classroom was silent, but the weight of her words hung in the air. Before the full weight of the teacher's words could settle in Jordan's mind, the sound of her voice cut through the air once again. "Before we show how one simple act of kindness changes everything, let us know, where in the world are you watching from? And if you believe that respect can't be bought, but earned through hard work, subscribe for more powerful true stories like this." Jordan barely heard her as his thoughts drifted elsewhere. Home. That morning had started like any other. The kitchen was warm, the scent of coffee and toast filling the air, but it was quiet, almost too quiet. Jordan, like every day, rushed to get ready for school. His father, a tall and weathered man in his mid-40s, stood at the stove, stirring something on the burner. He wasn't the loud type, never had been, but the weight of his silence always carried a sense of purpose. "Eat up," his father said, pushing a plate of scrambled eggs across the table. "Big day today." Jordan nodded, not looking up. "Yeah, Dad. Got to get to school and face the same day as usual." His father paused, his hand stilling mid-motion. He looked at Jordan with a kind of knowing that only parents have. "Don't worry about those kids, son. Don't let 'em tell you what you're worth by what you wear. You've got more inside of you than they'll ever understand." Jordan glanced up, meeting his father's steady gaze. For a brief moment, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lift. His dad always knew the right words to say, though Jordan didn't always admit it. Those words stayed with him. And yet, with the world outside, he knew it wouldn't be enough. His father's strength wasn't something he could carry with him to school. At least, that's what he thought. Jordan finished his breakfast in silence. But as he stood to grab his worn jacket from the hook by the door, his father's hand reached out and gently squeezed his shoulder. "You're doing great. You're already more than what they think you are." It wasn't the words that made Jordan feel better. It was the quiet confidence in his father's eyes, the belief that, no matter what, he was something worth standing tall for. But as he walked out the door, and into the world, Jordan couldn't help but feel that it was a battle he'd have to fight on his own. The words of his teacher echoed in his mind. You need to start acting like it. Like what? Jordan thought. He wasn't sure, but the fear and shame gnawed at him as he walked to the bus stop, his jacket too thin against the cold air. Little did he know, the battle was far from over, and his father was about to give him the greatest lesson of all. The bell rang, signaling the start of another day. The hum of the classroom returned as the students took their seats, some already whispering about the confrontation, others too uncomfortable to speak. Jordan, his head low, sat quietly at his desk, his mind still replaying the teacher's words over and over. Jordan, can you answer the question? The teacher's voice broke through his thoughts. He blinked, startled, and looked up. The whole class was watching him. She had chosen him again. He wasn't sure if it was her way of making him pay for what she had just done, or if it was something she believed he couldn't handle. I don't know, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course you don't, she snapped, crossing her arms. Maybe, if you put as much effort into your schoolwork as you do into looking like you belong on a street corner, you'd have a chance. Gasps rippled through the class. The words, sharp and biting, cut deeper than any of the others. The classroom suddenly felt suffocating. The teacher's cruelty wasn't subtle anymore. It was a public spectacle. The laughter from some students stung just as badly as the teacher's words. Jordan wanted to speak, wanted to say something, but the lump in his throat made it impossible. His fingers dug into the desk, his nails pressing into the wood, and he stared at his hands, trying to ignore the sting of tears welling in his eyes. Before he could even collect himself, the door to the classroom creaked open, and the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the tension in the room. Everyone turned, surprised, as the headmaster walked in, his expression stern. Behind him stood Jordan's father, tall and calm, his presence immediately commanding the room. The class fell silent. The teacher straightened, clearly surprised, but no longer smug. Jordan's father, dressed in his work clothes, a simple button-down shirt and jeans, stood at the front of the classroom, looking directly at the teacher with a calm but unyielding gaze. Without a word, he stepped forward, pulling Jordan to his feet. "You have something to say to my son." His father's voice was steady, unshaken. "But you're going to listen first. You're going to hear about the boy you just tried to humiliate." The teacher blinked, her defiant posture slipping for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The room was still. Every student in the classroom felt the shift, the power change. Jordan's father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The strength in his presence was more than enough. Jordan stood next to his father, his heart racing but filled with a strange kind of warmth, as he felt his father's hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it made all the difference. In that moment, he wasn't alone, and neither was the teacher. "Jordan doesn't need to explain himself to you," his father said calmly, but there was fire behind his words. "But I will. You don't know the kind of man he is, and that's your mistake." Jordan looked up at his father, the weight of the world lifting, his shoulders straightening, as the storm of words he had carried inside finally found their strength. The room was thick with tension, as Jordan's father stood before the teacher, his presence quiet yet undeniable. The teacher, now visibly uncomfortable, fidgeted with the hem of her blouse, the harshness in her earlier tone slowly fading. For the first time since she had begun her shaming, she was being forced to confront the true weight of her words. "I didn't raise my son to be made to feel small. by someone who doesn't understand what real strength is, Jordan's father continued, his voice steady, each word a quiet challenge to the teacher's authority. What you've done today isn't just about clothes. It's about assumptions you've made, about his worth, about his potential, all because of the way he looks. Jordan stood tall beside his father, the weight of his earlier embarrassment now replaced by something stronger, something that had been brewing in him for a long time, but had never had a chance to surface until now. He looked at the teacher, not with the self-doubt he'd carried into the classroom earlier, but with the quiet resolve that had always been a part of him, hidden beneath layers of judgment and shame. His father's words gave him the courage to look her in the eyes without flinching. "You know nothing about him," his father went on, his gaze never leaving the teacher. "You see a black boy with a worn-out shirt, and you assume he's nothing. You assume he doesn't belong, that he's lazy, that he doesn't have the right to be here. But let me tell you something. You've got it all wrong. Jordan's future isn't defined by a shirt. It's defined by his heart, his mind, and his will to succeed despite people like you who think they know better." The teacher's face flushed, her previous certainty now replaced with hesitation. Her mouth opened and closed, the words she wanted to say getting caught in the lump forming in her throat. But Jordan's father wasn't finished. "You think you can break him by shaming him?" he said, stepping closer. "You think you can take away his worth with a few words? You don't get to decide who he is or what he's capable of." The room was silent now. The class, who had watched this unfold in uncomfortable silence, shifted in their seats, each of them processing what had just been said, what they had just witnessed. The teacher, once so sure of herself, now looked smaller, almost defeated under the weight of Jordan's father's words. For the first time, the truth of the moment settled over her, the realization that her assumption had been not only wrong, but cruel. And now, standing before her, was the very man who had come to show her exactly why judgment should never be cast so lightly. The teacher stood still, her body tense as if frozen, in the midst of a thought she couldn't escape. Jordan's father's words lingered in the air, their weight pressing down on her, unraveling the tight fabric of authority she had so confidently woven around herself. She swallowed hard, the sharp taste of regret crawling up her throat. The defiance she had worn like armor now felt like a mask she couldn't hold up any longer. Jordan, still standing beside his father, watched her carefully. He had expected anger, maybe more shaming, but instead there was something different in her expression. It wasn't the smug satisfaction of someone in power. It was something else, something closer to shame. The tightness in her jaw softened slightly as her gaze dropped to the floor, and in that brief silence, the reality of her actions hit her harder than any confrontation could. For the first time, she saw him, not the boy in front of her desk, not the one she had dismissed with one cutting remark, but the young man with potential, with value, with dignity. His clothes didn't define him. His worth wasn't decided by her narrow view. And the image she had painted of him was wrong, deeply wrong. I'm sorry," she said, her voice a little shaky, quieter than it had been all day. "I shouldn't have said those things." Jordan's father stepped back slightly, giving her space to breathe. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held a quiet challenge, urging her to see beyond her own arrogance. Jordan looked at her, not with anger, but with something deeper, a quiet understanding, a recognition that it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about growth. "I didn't think," the teacher continued, her voice faltering as she met Jordan's eyes, I was wrong. I shouldn't have judged you like that. I'm sorry." Jordan didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. The apology, though simple, held weight in the room. It wasn't about her words being enough. It was about the shift in her. He could see it. She wasn't the same person who had belittled him a few minutes ago. The class, still silent, exchanged glances. Some looked at Jordan, some at the teacher. The energy had shifted. The power dynamics had been flipped, not by force, but by truth, by the simple act of standing tall, not letting the weight of judgment break you. Jordan's father placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it gently, a wordless gesture of pride. They didn't need anything more. The victory had already been won, not by confrontation, but by resilience. And as the teacher stood there, her face flushed with the weight of her own mistake, Jordan simply nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. It was understanding. Understanding that in this moment, they were both learning something. The power of judgment, and the power of seeing each other for who they truly were. The teacher, now visibly humbled, stood in the center of the classroom, her shoulders slumped, her gaze lowered. The air was heavy with the silence that followed her apology, as if the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something more. But Leonard knew that nothing else needed to be said. The moment was done. The power had shifted, and it wasn't in the words exchanged. It was in the way the space had changed, the way respect had been silently earned. Jordan, still standing by his father, felt a quiet weight lifting from his chest. The discomfort, the sting of judgment, it was all still there. But now it was tempered by the slow, steady realization that he wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Not to his father, not to anyone in this room, and certainly not to the woman who had tried to diminish him. His father, ever the pillar of quiet strength, turned to him. "You good, son?" His voice was calm, steady, as though the storm they had just weathered had never really happened. Jordan nodded, his lips pressing into a small smile. "Yeah, Dad, I'm good." The teacher, who had once towered over Jordan with her condescension, now seemed small in comparison. Her eyes flickered to him once more, but there was no judgment left in them, just a quiet understanding. It wasn't the apology that made everything right, but the fact that in this moment, Leonard had shown her the true meaning of respect. Not just for the boy, but for herself. Leonard placed a hand on his son's shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. He didn't need to say more. The lesson had been learned. As they walked out of the classroom, the weight of the moment lingered in the air. The classroom door closed behind them with a soft thud, and the world outside awaited them. The hallway, still buzzing with the remnants of the earlier tension, suddenly felt lighter. Jordan glanced up at his father, his face a mixture of relief and quiet pride. Leonard met his gaze and smiled, a rare, soft smile that only appeared when he was truly proud of his son. "You did good, Jordan. You stood your ground. Never let anyone make you feel small." Jordan's chest swelled with the warmth of his father's words, the kind that carried more weight than any classroom lecture or teacher's reprimand ever could. As they walked down the hallway, Jordan no longer felt the sting of the teacher's judgment. Instead, he felt the strength of his father beside him, the quiet, steady strength that had seen him through every challenge, every lesson, and every fight for respect. Today, Leonard hadn't just taught his son about standing up for himself. He had taught him about walking with pride, even when the world tried to push you down. The battle wasn't over, but for now, Leonard knew that his son had learned the most important lesson of all. As they walked out of the building, the hallway stretching before them felt different, emptier somehow, though still filled with the echoes of what had just happened. The classroom had returned to normal, the teacher's eyes now avoiding Jordan's, her pride deflated. But Jordan didn't feel the weight of her gaze anymore. What mattered now was the quiet steadiness of his father beside him, the words of wisdom settling in his chest like a familiar beat. Leonard had always told him, "Stand tall, son. The world doesn't need to make space for you, but you don't shrink to fit. You take your space, and you don't let anyone push you out." And today, Jordan had done just that. The world might have tried to knock him down, to define him by the things he wore, by the assumptions they placed on his back, but it didn't work. Not today, not with his father's lessons embedded deep in his heart. They stepped outside the school doors, the sun shining brightly now, casting long shadows across the pavement. The cool breeze felt like a reset, a chance to breathe after the storm. Jordan looked up at his father, eyes wide with the realization that today was a moment that would stay with him for a lifetime. The words of the teacher, once so sharp, now seemed small, distant. In their place, the confidence his father had instilled in him over the years filled the void, stronger than any shaming words could ever be. "Dad," Jordan said, voice steady but filled with a newfound certainty, "I'm proud of me today." Leonard's eyes softened, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "So am I, son. So am I." They stood there for a moment, just the two of them, letting the weight of what had happened sink in. Leonard's hand on his shoulder felt like the anchor he'd always needed, a reminder that no matter what, he was never alone. Jordan had learned more than he realized today, not just about standing up for himself, but about the power of dignity, how it wasn't something handed to you, but something you carried. It was quiet. It was unshakable. It was the kind of strength that even in silence spoke volumes. And as they walked down the street side by side, Jordan realized that sometimes the biggest victories didn't come from loud arguments or outbursts. They came from quietly owning your worth, regardless of who was watching. The loudest victories are often the quietest, when you walk with dignity, even in the face of those who try to knock you down. Have you ever faced judgment based on something that wasn't true? Share this story with someone who believes true strength comes from within, because dignity is earned, not given. Hit that like button if you know that your worth can never be measured by your clothes or your mistakes.